Today in the studio, joining us Labor MP and member for Bruce Julian Hill. Welcome, Julian. And Liberal MP and member for Menzies, Keith Wolahan, is with us too. Welcome to you, Keith. Why don't we start on aged care? It was a pretty cut and dried promise from Labor Julian Hill, 24 hours, 7 days a week. Now we discover that the rate of achievement there is at about 86%. We calling that a broken promise?
It's actually terrific news if you drill into it. Remember, this was a recommendation of the Royal Commission, and if ever there's something that passes the pub test, it's the proposition that there should be a nurse in a nursing home 24 hours a day. You know, these days you don't go to a nursing home unless you're, later in life and you really need that care. This previous government got the report, but they point blank refused to make that commitment. Now, we were told we couldn't do this, and the data out today shows that 98% of the target is being met. 86%, as you said, of the homes now have 24/7 care. The majority of the rest are very, very close. 23.5 hours out of 24 hours a day. This is a cause for celebration, and I think an apology from the opposition, who, remember, in the lead-up in May and June, the sky was going to fall in, there was no way we were going to get there, there's a giant shortage of nurses. This is actually really welcome news for everyone in aged care and their loved ones.
All right. Well, missed by that much, Keith Wolahan. If you choose to apologise, then go ahead. But it is better, isn't it, to accelerate these goals, even if they should be missed ever so slightly, than to not be ambitious for the sake of aged care residents?
Well, I think the thing to remember here is governing is hard and election promises are easy. So when we saw the announcement, and it was by July this year, it hasn't been met. So the promise wasn't met. But we need to make sure that we're providing for people in aged care homes, as well as people who are looking for home care packages. And there's a shortage of qualified people in the key professions for both. So of course we need more nurses in aged care homes, but we also need more allied workers, particularly occupational therapists in home care packages as well. So we need to do the work to make sure that they're there, but also there are consequences for the way this was announced. Many aged care homes closed because they couldn't meet the requirements. And again, people had to move out of those.
Many or some? We're certainly aware of a few, and it wasn't always clear that where they did, they were doing it because they couldn't comply with the new standards. In some cases, or I know one in Sydney that was well reported, I think there were legitimate commercial and business reasons.
So many or some is splitting hairs, and even if it's only a small number, that's significant for the people involved. And there are others that we know that are open now that are not sure if they will be able to stay open because of the regulatory burden that they have. There are certain exemption criteria that are very difficult to meet and involve giving notice every 30 minutes, and that's a huge burden on those homes.
All right, why don't we move on to Robodebt? You were both present. I think we certainly were for the divisions on the Bill Shorten motion. We've already spoken to him today, Julian. When will the government call it quits on the pursuit of Scott Morrison and other ministers over this matter? Are you done yet?
Robodebt was a disgrace, and I represent, in southeast Melbourne, some of the most disadvantaged people in the country, one of the most disadvantaged electorates in Victoria and Australia. I've listened to the Liberal Party for years on this. I've had arguments in the chamber. I've had conversations outside the chamber. I don't think they get it. I don't think they really understand the pain and the trauma. I've sat down week after week with people clutching a $20,000 debt notice for money they didn't owe with the power of the Commonwealth logo, so telling them they had to repay it at $10 a week. Just for the record, that takes over 38 years to do so. Sure. And so what we have still not seen from Peter Dutton or the Liberal Party, with the exception of Bridget Archer, is an acceptance of responsibility, an acceptance of the Royal Commission's recommendations. And let's be really clear, if as a society, as a parliament, as a country, and as an opposition, they don't learn and accept the Royal Commission's recommendations, then they are not fit to govern.
What do you want them to say? What do you want to hear from these figures?
Look, this is the resolution. I mean, which bits of this do you disagree with? accepts the finding of the report of the Royal Commission, expresses its deep regret and apologises to the victims of the unlawful scheme, commits to ensuring this cruel, unlawful chapter in the history of Australian public administration is never repeated. They voted against that. How hard is it?
All right, well, you can admonish members of the opposition. I don't know how hard you want to go on Keith Wolahan.
No, look, I pointed at Keith.
Hill.
I like Keith. I feel sorry for Keith because he's actually not a stupid person, and it must be hard for him surrounded by all these cookers that are taking over the opposition.
All right, faint praise there for you, Keith. But here are the words that Keith used in the Federation Chamber this week. Illiberal, unfair and incompetent is how you described the Robodebt scheme. Take us behind your own thinking and approach to this now that it is in the past. Do you want to stand out against the rest of the crowd on your side as clearly, condemning Robodebt?
I don't think I am standing out. I gave a speech a few days ago in the Federation Chamber. I think that the scale of Robodebt is one that we should all reflect on, particularly us in the Liberal Party. We should reflect upon it. I do think it was illiberal, it was incompetent, and it hurt people on a large scale, including people that I acted for as a barrister quite early in the scheme. And I think, again, governing is complex, and when we make mistakes, we need to reflect upon it, or else we'll repeat them in other areas, including maybe in the way the ATO sends notices out to small businesses or other people. So I encourage Julian to read my speech, but many others of my colleagues, they have expressed regret and sorrow. It may not be in the form that the Labor Party likes, and the form they like is that you've got to cross the floor from your party, which is something they would never tolerate in their own party, ever. You'd be kicked out.
Is there, politically speaking, a need to give it to them or to the Australian voting public in a form that does rule a line under this once and for all? Because if you look at Bill Shorten and others, it looks like this is the gift that keeps on giving. They keep going back there every question time. There's a motion today. There are further procedures underway at departmental level. This might just keep going on and on and on. What do you think could do to rule a line under it for the coalition?
Well, I guess that's a discussion about the politics of it, and I'm much more interested in the policy and how we learn from it. If the Labor Party want to focus on that's their prerogative. But we have to learn from it and make sure it's not repeated. It's a 1,000-page report. There is a sealed section that may have civil or criminal legal proceedings. Those are serious things that shouldn't be undermined by a motion in the Parliament. We need to respect that process too.
All right, 60-day dispensing. Julian Hill, neither of you are senators, and maybe that's a blessing, so we won't spend too much time discussing.
They muck up our work, Greg.
Yeah, they certainly tried to today, but the government prevailed on the numbers. Is this all in place now? What do we say, or what does the government say to members of the public who are looking for these concessions to kick in from the 1st of September? Is it beyond reach of politics from this day forth?
It's been a pretty bizarre couple of days on that issue, but let me just make 2 points really clearly. The government is sticking to our policy of cheaper medicines. This is a reform that was proposed years ago on clinical advice, and it should happen. And it's a very simple proposition. If you support cheaper medicines and you accept the clinical advice, then you vote for it. But the second point I'd make is we've had bizarre scenes over the last 48 hours. The opposition's changed its position about 3 times in the last 12 hours. Yesterday they introduced a disallowance motion and they were going to stop it, block cheaper medicines. Then this morning I was watching the TV and up flashed the banner, opposition withdraws disallowance motion, so I went okay. And then they voted to stall debate on their own disallowance motion. So they're for it, they're against it, they're all over the shop. If you support cheaper medicines, you support the government, and we should all back this in.
It takes some explaining, doesn't it, Keith? Because we've already heard from colleagues of yours that they support cheaper medicine. They support the introduction on the 1st of September. They support cost of living measures in general, and yet it's not good enough, and it's tried to be stalled, at least initially today, in the Senate. How do you square all that off for voters who might be a little confused?
I think we need to look at the intended and unintended consequences of this policy. The intended consequences are ones we are in furious agreement about. We want cheaper medicines and the 60 days we agree on. The unintended consequences are that if in the long term small pharmacies are going to close because they weren't properly consulted, then in the long run no one will pay cheaper medicines. And particularly in rural areas, I'm concerned that small pharmacies, who are the backbone of those communities when it comes to healthcare, they will be gone, and they don't open overnight. It's a very difficult thing to put back.
And might the coalition revisit this when Parliament returns if you think it is causing damage to farmers, to community pharmacy?
Well, that's the point. We want the government to negotiate with pharmacists, particularly small pharmacists. We've seen it in other sectors of the economy where small operators go out of business, and then the large operators get those profits back in other ways by jacking up prices. We don't want that to happen in this sector.
All right. One final topic. Julian, I don't know how much across it both of you are, but there were discussions, particularly involving crossbenchers today, around what we used to call alco-pops, the addition of alcohol into branded drinks, which we would normally call soft drinks. Mark Butler has said he's seeking departmental advice on this. Does it cause you any concern from a health point of view?
Yeah, it does. Alcohol use disorders, substance abuse disorders affect every part of Australian society. No family, no suburb is immune. And the marketing tactics that appear to be the case here by trying to shove alcohol in what looks like a soft drink are of concern. And I think it's an important issue to raise, and the Minister's right to seek advice. We should have a look at it.
And are the makers of these products, Keith, do you think actively trying to circumvent or find loopholes around existing arrangements?
I think as long as there is a proper regulated sale process for these things, they're not put into vending machines or in milk bars, they're in licensed bottle shops and other licensed venues, then I think we can trust people to make the decisions themselves, and we certainly can here.
OK. We're about to farewell both of you. Just finally and very quickly, Keith, what's this I hear about a MP's screening of Barbie? Tell me more. How many attended that?
So my good friend, the member for Flinders, said that not enough of the class of the new Liberals in the House, and there's not many of us, have seen the Barbie movie. So we were taken along to see it, and I must admit, without spoiling the movie, I didn't know the link between the patriarchy and horses, but I also came away feeling quite insecure about my own body image looking at Ryan Gosling, and I think that's one of the points of the movie.
I think a lot of males might feel that way. Have you seen it yourself, Julian?
Not yet. I did actually. I was planning to wear pink and go to Oppenheimer, but I accidentally went to Oppenheimer on Sunday night, which was terrific. And I don't know, maybe I'll go and wear black at Barbie.
All right. Well, you got 3 weeks away from Canberra to catch up on all this viewing. Julian Hill, Keith Wolahan, thanks to both for joining us here in the studio.